Tēnā koutou katoa. If I were you, I'd be thinking steadfastly about lunch, not me, because that's next on your list. So I'm going to treat you to an action-packed 10, 12 minutes on the Ombudsman and then leave some question time for you. And I'm going to keep it high level because you won't thank me if I start to drill down into all sorts of detail. So my aim is to tell you just a bit about my office because it's Consumer Rights Day. And really what the object, according to the flyer, is this day brings together speakers from government, ombudsman schemes and organisations that deal with complaints from people when they have a problem with different kinds of services. So let's start work. And that's not the best of start. Parliament's men. And these cool-looking dudes here are, first of all, the Chief Ombudsman and Leo Donnelly, the other Ombudsman. You've had a number of ombudsmen who have probably talked to you or will do, and in New Zealand there are only two parliamentary ombudsmen, Leo Donnelly and me. The others are set up by special schemes. And just one thing to note, in most other countries in the world there's no limit to who can call themselves an ombudsman. So in Britain there is an ombudsman for low-flying aircraft, for furniture removals, you name it. And in Australia, there is an ombudsman for all sorts of things. Here, you cannot use the name unless you have permission to do so. So it's quite a restricted use. And we are appointed by Parliament in the true sense of the word. We don't answer to a government department and we don't answer to a minister. We are only answerable to Parliament. So it's truly independent from the workings of government. About the Ombudsman's work. So I've been in this role for 1 year. Before that, I was a law commissioner, and before that, the principal family court judge. And it's very different work than I've done before because the breadth is simply enormous. Now, here are the acts which give us our authority, and I'm going to tell you a fraction about each one, and that's all. The Ombudsman Act 1975 is really the founding act that enables us to inquire into the actions of agencies. The Official Information Act 1982, a lot of you, how many people here have interacted with the OIA? How many have never, how many really don't know what it's about? Right. Most of you, how many people have heard about the Official Information Act? Okay, so this is a much used act and accounts for a lot of our work. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Then there's the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act. That deals with local authorities like Wellington City Council and pretty much replicates the Official Information Act and the Ombudsman Act, but in a local context. Now, the Crimes of Torture Act is really interesting. It sounds gruesome. Pincers and electric prods getting people to confess. But in fact, it's a UN convention which says that the countries who subscribe to the treaty should have reasonable standards of care for those that they detain. It's not just prisoners, it's not just those who one might think they deserve it. It is mental health patients who are committed under Section 30 of the Mental Health Act. And one thing that we have started to look at is whether there is sufficient oversight of patients who are locked up in dementia units, and in respect of whom there is often very little official oversight. Then there is the Protected Disclosures Act, that's really in modern parlance whistleblowing. And then the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We have an important role in this. We are responsible as one of the agencies for monitoring our government's oversight and compliance with this treaty. So you'll get a picture that the Ombudsman Office, and there are about 90 of us on the staff. We have an office in Christchurch and one in Auckland as well as Wellington. We receive a lot of inquiries and complaints. Actually, I'll tell you just very quickly about this. So we've just published our annual report. For those of you who are sick of the antics of New Zealand rugby and you want something decent to read, the annual report of the Ombudsman will be your complete answer. And what this tells us in the many, many pages is this sort of thing. For instance, overview. And I'll just read you this opening portion. This is hot off the press. So last year we received 12,595 complaints and other work, the second highest ever received, and 4% more than the work received last year. So we're growing. We completed 12,786 complaints and other work, 7% more than we completed last year. We finished the year with 1,591 complaints and other work on hand, 11% less than the same time last year. And we're clearing our work at the moment at the rate of 105%. Now you might think, well, that's a good news story, but it needed to be, because we were an organisation that wasn't providing a heck of a good service to complainants. We were too slow and too pedantic in our approach, and we realised that we needed to pick up the pace. Now, in the little time I've got, and I'm comfortable with that, the Ombudsman Act 1975, really, really powerful piece of legislation, fundamentally important to our country. Why? Because government agencies can get too bureaucratic, too powerful, and can make decisions which aren't fair. Now, some schemes have their inbuilt complaint mechanism. So if you're unhappy in the social welfare context with certain benefit payments, you can go to MSD and the in-house system they have. If you want to complain about police, you go to the Independent Police Complaints Authority. But we have a very broad, I use the word jurisdiction, power to inquire into the actions of state agencies. It could be customs, it could be immigration, and we can require, under the power of a commission of inquiry, to see what material was used to make a decision, and we're not bound by a court with burden of proof and pleadings. We can do what's fair at the end of the exercise. So the Ombudsman Act accounts for about half of our work. Official Information Act. The Official Information Act is said to be a constitutionally paramount document because it is said to exist to give people access to good government. It's there to create transparency. It's there so that New Zealanders know the basis upon which law is being made and what happened in the process of law being made. So the Official Information Act is an act designed to allow people to see what happened and to get information. It's much used, of course, by opposition parties in Parliament. Next year being an election year, it'll be a feast in the Office of the Ombudsman. But it's also used by media. And the last thing that was released by us was a civil aviation report into the security breach by the Honourable Jerry Brownlee at the airport, and that's the act in action. So CIA, Civil Aviation, did a report. It was sought by a couple of journalists. The report was heavily redacted, which technically means blank bits here and there. A complaint's made to us, we read it, we get to read everything, and that's why we operate in such careful secrecy and responsibility, and in the end we make a recommendation as to what should be released and what should not. So you'll see that there are some things of high national security that we don't think should be released, and something like this we felt that CIA should release it pretty much as it was. Some people use us heavily, and we have one or two complainants that almost regard our office as their second home. Let's talk a little bit just about some of the ways in which it's important for the Ombudsman to help. So a couple of things off the top of my head and then some questions. The first thing is that as courts have got more and more expensive with filing fees and access to justice becomes more difficult for some, we are a free service. And we have tried to make it so that it's a simple access to us, either a form that you download from the web, and people are doing that more and more. We have a physical space where people can come in, but are doing that less and less. So the first thing is it's a free service. The second is it's very broad as to what we can look at. We don't sit there with a stamp line by line going through a complaint to see whether it's completely sensible. Sometimes they are not. But if there's the vestige of a complaint, we will look at it. Now, an example which created a lot of work was the Christchurch earthquakes, particularly the second one. And a lot of people had a beef against EQC that they didn't feel that they were treated fairly in their earthquake claims. And some people were disabled and couldn't read to the extent that everyone else can, nor respond as quickly. And our responsibility is to be reasonably user-friendly. Thank you, I saw that. And judges normally talk for as long as they possibly can and don't let anyone else speak, but I won't fall into that trap. And maybe the third thing I'll say is that what we try and do is achieve balance. So we do what's called a notification. We find out what both sides are. We write what's called a provisional opinion, and we let people have a look at it. And someone might say, you got that wrong, you've forgotten such and such, or we think that you're wrong for the following reasons. We then form a final opinion, and people are expected, in relation to official information and Ombudsman Act, to comply with our recommendations. We don't have the force of an arrest or a judgment you'd get from court, but our recommendations are pretty powerful, and we find, by and large, people comply. So, there, everything you wanted to know about the Office of the Ombudsman in 15 minutes. Very happy to take some questions. Yes. It's Scandinavian, and it doesn't actually mean a he person. Ombudsman is a Scandinavian word which means to investigate. And Sir Guy Poles was our first ombudsman 60 years ago or so, and probably our most famous. But that's the origins of it. It's Scandinavian, and it means to investigate and look inside. Yes. So that's a very, very good question, because Dame Beverly Waker, my predecessor, did a report at the end of last year called Not a Game of Hide and Seek. And it was a report analysing non-compliance with the Official Information Act. So we've started down the road of publicising slowness, publicising non-compliance. We go to two committees of Parliament, the Government Administration Committee, which examines us closely on what we're doing and where we're finding our problems, and the other committee in Parliament is called the Officers of Parliament Committee. Because the latter one is chaired by the Speaker and made up of all parties, there's no domination by any particular party. So I've found in my brief time thus far, we can be utterly fearless. We do not have to worry that we'll get back to the office and have a please explain from a minister of such and such. If anything, they know to watch it. So it works pretty well. It's not actually such a big issue as you might think. There was an editorial at the beginning of this year in Fairfax, which have got a real thing about this, because they'd gone to the Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank had written back to the requester saying, you can have this and it'll cost you $650. So there was an editorial in the Don Post which really focused on Fairfax's concern. Two things I want to say. One is we've published a number of guides, and we've put those on the website, and one is a charging guide. And what we've really tried to say is, look, is the request reasonable? Is it core work? Is this reasonable within your expectations under the Official Information Act to do this? If, on the other hand, it's a constant complainant who's got a hobby of complaining, is the request a trawling exercise over a long time? And is the end result the agency has to go to more than what is reasonable to supply, then charging begins to bite in. I've found on my travels, most agencies don't want to charge, they actually want to be transparent. So it's not been the problem I thought it would be. And what I would say, what drives me is the fact that the Act is free. You don't have to pay to come to us, and I expect agencies to really operate in a similar fashion. Well, there are two things that we did. I realised we could not work with this millstone round our neck. It's the classic, how can staff put up with people who are so grumpy with us, let alone the agency, because we're not getting on with their work. So Parliament funded us to set up a backlog team, and we have a specialist team in action reducing that backlog. And we're very disciplined about what goes into backlog, and the fact that the backlog people can only do that work. They're not available to do other things. The second thing to answer your question is, our motto is fairness for all, and some of you may know that, but I've interpreted that to mean everyone is entitled to reasonable access, not just those that make a big noise. So for those that are repeats and who are overdoing it, I've begun to cut them off. And for those who have been waiting patiently while we've spent a lot of time with others, they're getting faster access. So, and we do deal, just perhaps it's thematic for your day up to a point, a lot of complainants have a beef. They've gone to an agency, they've got a head of steam up, and part of our whole job, isn't it, is to talk them down, to get them in a place where they might see a reasonable solution. But I accept that a portion of our complainants have little insight. And unless we are firm, I call them querulants. And I think you do the wrong thing by continuing to feed them space. So we've begun to say enough is enough. And look, the other thing is, I just am not going to have our staff on the receiving end of bitter, obscene exchanges with querulants. So we've started in a number of respects to be a bit tighter. Yeah. Well, the answer is yes, because look, if someone's on the phone, you know how, just as I'm talking to you now, I know I've got 15 minutes and I know that we've got a discipline, but you don't necessarily have that when someone rings up and the rules are a little bit unclear as to how long they've got and how fair we're going to be. So the conversation just go on and on and on, backwards and forwards. And I've said to our staff now, it's got to go somewhere, guys. And if you've got a reasonable view after a period that this conversation is not going to really pick up and go somewhere, that's the end of it. It's because someone else is in the queue. And that's the way I see it. Perhaps I'll finish, if you don't mind. A big push by us on early resolution. So we had our way of doing things which was quite bureaucratic, really, and quite process-driven. I feel that what people want these days is early resolution. That's the expectation. In the old days, you wrote a letter and it got posted and eventually you got a reply back. How many people now post letters? Not many. And we send our stuff out by email, and I'm expecting replies back within a shorter period of time. And I think that people these days, you send an email, I've known about you, but you're wondering why you haven't got a reply the next day. And so people's expectations of time are different. And for us to be dealing with complaints 2 years old is, to me, just unacceptable. Now, that's probably me done. I can smell your food. So thank you very much for your interest and very good questions.